the UK has lost, in terms of wealth, household wealth, £500 billion in lost household wealth from having that in cash and not investing.
Exactly. That's just the investing balance sheet side of it, let alone the opportunity costs of not being able to fund a new restaurant group or a new airline or a new software company or a new biotech business. A huge part of the reason that Britain is dying, our metaphorical toes are curling up.
Talk to me about the excitement of the biotech sector and why it's so important for us.
The last century has been about tech and physics. And the next century from now on is going to be about biotech and biology.
What would be your key message to somebody in that case then who does take it for granted?
So I'll go back to it again. Read. Average screen time of a British adult is 5 or 6 hours a day. It's just a lack of knowledge and a lack of skills.
What technology are you most excited about? What is gene editing? Talk to me about cash ISAs.
Well, as we were just saying before we clicked record, there was a great piece yesterday by Duncan Lamont, who's a really smart analyst at Schroders, who produces amazing stuff on LinkedIn, and I encourage people to follow him to the extent they can. And he did a really, really good kind of academic, deep research takedown of just how problematic it is that Brits are so risk averse, and we have like everybody in cash ISAs and nobody invests in the stock market. And I was traveling around London doing an investor meeting yesterday, so I sort of just commented on it and shared it and sort of gave it the big thumbs up. But had I had more time, I would have dredged up a fairly aggressive comment I put on LinkedIn, I don't know, 6 or 7 weeks ago, when there's a journalist called Paul Lewis, who he's a BBC journalist, and he's hosted Moneybox, the lead, arguably Britain's leading personal finance weekly or whatever news program. And I've thought he was, without too fine a point on it, pretty clueless for many, many years, right? Given the stuff he talks about and says. But a few weeks ago, to your point about cash ISAs, he contributed an article to The Telegraph that was basically saying, I've never invested in the stock market. I would never invest in the stock market. You should just have cash. And all his mind-blowingly bad reasons for his position. And I posted at the time saying, with financial journalists like this, is it any surprise that we have a growth and productivity problem in this country? And I genuinely think that it's almost to the level of a national scandal. Yeah, that arguably one of the most senior commentators on financial markets and personal finance at the national broadcaster at the BBC is so completely clueless about wealth creation and about what this country needs to make life better for millions of people. And people following his advice, literally, which will be lots of people of a certain age, the demographic who listen to Radio 4, right? And he will have done them a massive, massive, massive disservice. And it makes me angry, as you can probably tell. And, if the BBC, does the guy have a regulatory status with the FCA? Has he ever passed any exams? He's basically causing enormous financial harm to individuals in this country and to the country by extension. The theme we can come back to. I think a big problem in the UK is that nobody invests and financial literacy is so poor, and that is to be vilified and pounced on. People like that need to be held to account. And I think the BBC, if they have proper oversight of their staff, people at the BBC need to be sufficiently financially literate to know that if their personal finance journalist is commenting in egregious error about something, he's not fit for purpose and he shouldn't be in his post. And that's I know it's a bit harsh. No, but that's my genuine belief. And Duncan put a great piece of research out of sort of the academic evidence for stock market investment over just keeping your money in cash.
And that was a point I was making. I actually responded to his article, and I don't think it's a personal finance issue anymore. I actually think it's an economic issue. It's a policy issue now, because 100%. There is £1.5 trillion in either cash deposits or cash ISAs in the UK.
Yeah, or US equities. Well, as we discussed last time, but not in British equities.
But this is just, that 1.5 trillion is just in cash of some kind. And the point that he made was that if you look at the last X number of years, the UK has lost, in terms of wealth, household wealth, £500 billion in lost household wealth from having that in cash and not invested.
Yeah, exactly.
So that works out to be about per capita about $10,000.
But that's just the investing balance sheet side of it, let alone the opportunity costs of not being able to fund a new restaurant group or a new airline or a new software company or a new biotech business that might have a therapeutic cure for something. Well, I mean, you know, and obviously we discussed this last time you were kind enough to have me on. It's that's exactly right. It's like a huge part of the reason that Britain is dying, our metaphorical toes are curling up, you know, is because we don't have a functioning, our capital markets don't work anymore. And it's chicken and egg, because you say, all these people poop, why would I ever invest in British shares? They're rubbish, they're structurally bad. Look how badly they've performed. Well, it's chicken and egg. Like, if you export £1.5 trillion, there's no capital to support shares. They will definitionally perform badly because there's no funds flow to support them. There's, you know, businesses can't raise money to do things in the real economy. And yeah, it's a huge problem. And of course, you know, the current, by the way, I'm not party political, I always say this, under the Tories, it was dreadful. It started under Blair and Brown. That was actually their change to how the tax treatment of dividends in pension funds was kind of what started the rot. And I can't remember, there was one of the think tanks did a piece about how that was estimated to have raised kind of £5 billion a year for the Exchequer, and it's probably that £500 billion number is similar. It's, you know, they raised £5 billion a year into the government, and they've punished the UK economy to the tune of 500 billion, and it's probably a much bigger number than that. So and just to finish off, I know I crap on.
I know, I love the way it goes in this conversation.
Well, good, but you know, what's your point about $10,000? I mean, that's it. So I've made this point a lot. Where we really see how this all comes home to roost is in GDP per capita. So British GDP per capita is in the sort of mid $40,000 right? That's the level it was at 30 years ago. We've basically made no progress whatsoever. And given inflation, that money probably goes, that's supposedly inflation adjusted. It's probably not as effectively inflation adjusted to take account of the real increase in the cost of living that we've all endured. So people in Britain are, in the main, largely materially poorer than they were 30 years ago. Meanwhile, people in Singapore, Australia, America, Denmark, Ireland, South Korea are way, way wealthier, because all the fruits of technological progress and research and development and, you know, stock market, capital markets functioning properly has made these people way wealthier. And it's a tragedy. And people like Paul Lewis are absolutely a big part of the reason this has happened. And British people are poorer than they should be.
And I completely agree. And going back to your point about the capital markets, when we last spoke, I think Just Eat had agreed to move their listing to the US.
And there's Deliveroo last week.
And literally last week was Deliveroo. And some people might say, oh, this is look at this, you know, Deliveroo is a tech company that's been sold.
Yeah.
But there was a debate recently between Gary Stevenson, Daniel Priestley, and Stephen Bartlett. Yeah. Stephen Bartlett said, why can't we have one of these big technology companies?
Yeah, 100%. Well, we did, and now it's listed in New York.
Yeah,
Arm Holdings.
And this is the fundamental point, is that we do have these companies, but because as a country we are relatively so much poorer than the US
and risk averse,
that the company value is lower.
Yeah.
The pound is very weak at the moment, and American companies just come buy them.
Yeah.
And we will soon be owned by America.
Yeah, well, that's been a slow motion trend for, you know, decades, right? But it's being supercharged now, and it's going to be interesting to see what's left. And I think, to go back to the Gary Stevenson, sadly, I've only watched about half of that debate.
You couldn't get through the other half.
No, I really wanted to watch it. It's particularly ahead of this sort of discussion, but you know, this is front and centre why Britain is becoming really poor. You know, and I really fear that it's going to get worse. And you know, I think I feel it particularly acutely, as I said to you last time, because I've been trying to raise money for life sciences companies, and so that's kind of probably arguably one of the single most challenged bits of the economy, right? And it shouldn't be, because Britain's got some of the best science. You know, the Cambridge University alone, let alone Oxford, has won more Nobel Prizes in physiology and medicine and chemistry and physics that were relevant to the development of the biotech industry than pretty much all of the US Ivy League colleges put together, right? I believe I'm right in saying it's like Oxford's done 30 something and Cambridge has done 30 something, a few more than that off the top of my head. And yet the wealth creation that has accrued to Britain as a function of that scientific progress lags American wealth creation by trillions of dollars, not billions, trillions, right? That's true. And it's just like, I find it unbelievably frustrating, and it's only got worse. It should have got better, because the technology's better, the exponential's there, processing power, the cost of sequencing a genome, the fact that scientists can collaborate using WhatsApp, or seriously, it's. I mean, the power that we have in an iPhone today means that scientists can collaborate really inexpensive. There are all these structural trends that mean we should be creating more and more and more wealth. But the countervailing trend in this country through really bad policy, a really sort of poor national culture when it comes to things like investment and belief in capital markets, and journalists like Paul Lewis saying everybody should sit in cash, means that our very best science and our very best individuals, scientists and companies have to find cures for cancer overseas or whatever else they're doing. And it's we really do need to change it, because otherwise roll on another 10 years, this country is going to be like, we are basically, I was having lunch with an investor yesterday, they were saying they said that if you take out London, GDP per capita ex-London in the UK now is level with Albania.
Whoa.
Now, I didn't fact check that. I thought it was level with Poland or the Czech Republic.
But it's still a developing European country.
Correct. But basically, Britain is on its way to becoming a second or third world country. And the really frustrating thing, and yet we have so much, like we have so many advantages, our legal system, our language, our position in the world, our history, our, the fact that droves of Japanese and Chinese and American tourists want to come and spend billions of pounds here playing golf in Scotland or going to see Buckingham Palace. We have all the royal family, we have all these huge structural strategic advantages, and our policies have been so bad that even notwithstanding that, all of those advantages, we're doing a terrible job and going backwards economically. And by the way, Gary Stevenson, we can come on to, it's people like him who are going to cause that problem to become even worse. Yeah. Truly, we can get into what he is symptomatic of just how bad things have got, that we have a voice like that. Because if, I said this to you last time, I'm a Benthamite, what I want in all that I think about and do is the best possible outcome for the biggest percentage of the population, truly, right? And I would like to think that Gary wants the same. Like, based on, I've got through almost all of his book, and annoyingly, it's a very good book, Gary, by the way. He writes really well, and it's funny. It reminds me a lot of my early days in the city. Loads of the tales are really similar. But where I do think he's failed to take account of the lessons of, the best part of 2 centuries across dozens of economies and countries, is that the things he advocates for will make people's lives worse, not better. Absolutely. And, to unpack that a bit, so we shouldn't focus on wealth inequality. We should focus on wealth. So the more you focus on wealth inequality, that rich person's got more than me, and tax them, the less wealth you have. And trickle-down economics is this terrible term that gets a really bad rap, and so, it doesn't exist, and it doesn't, because it's so misunderstood. Because trickle-down economics isn't the fact that people, the average income, if there's big wealth disparity between billionaires and normal people, and the evidence is there's no trickle-down economics. But trickle-down economics is the fact that paracetamol costs pennies. It's the fact, it's all the things that we do. It's the fact that an iPhone, most normal people can have an iPhone. Most normal people have high-speed internet, apart from the very, very unfortunate and properly destitute. That's trickle-down economics. And the way, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of wealth and what wealth is, right? So I always say that vilifying billionaires, wealthy people don't lie around on piles of gold like Smaug the Dragon, which I said last time, right? So take someone like Jeff Bezos. I think I'm right in saying that Bezos owns about 10% of Amazon. It's around that sort of level. It might be 15, but it's that sort of level anyway. So if Bezos is worth 100 billion, that means that other people have made 900 billion. And they're not all rich people. They are in America, because America has an equity culture and people invest and normal people invest, blue collar workers invest, everybody thinks about investing. So Bezos is worth 100 billion. What has he given the world? He's given 900 billion of wealth to tens of millions of other people, including your clients and, people in Britain who've got US equity exposure have a little bit of that. That's amazing. We should encourage people like Jeff Bezos to make that thing happen, right? Because it's really good for the world. But the second order, that's just the first order direct consequence of Amazon and the value it's created, right? And those aren't accurate numbers. They're just illustrative numbers, right? Ballpark. And the point is still standing. The numbers are actually bigger, I think. What's Amazon capitalized at? 3 trillion?
Probably about that at the moment.
Yeah, so it's way more. It's $2 trillion or whatever, more than that. So that's real wealth creation. What has Amazon also given us? So all the people who rail against people like Bezos, fucking, billionaires, whatever. How many of them use Amazon every day? Seriously.
Yeah, exactly.
And what has Amazon given us? Well, it's given us basically the best internet infrastructure in the world in history for tons of companies to run off. It's given us the ability to buy pretty much anything we want. The people at the lower rungs of society benefit massively from the fact that Amazon gives them stuff at a much lower price than they would have got it 30 years ago. And actually, if you're a kind of eco warrior, which to a certain extent I am, but I just think all of our policies are completely 180 degrees, achieving the opposite of sorting the environment out. We can come back to that. But, Amazon has also been a huge part of the dematerialization trend, which is that, basically if you stream digital products and services like books and music, 30 years ago, people would buy LPs or CDs or whatever, and that required loads of nasty chemicals to print all that, to create billions of CDs and billions of records, and loads of shipping and packaging and, oil and that all of those and books and stuff. But Amazon as a technology platform has been a driver of that dematerialization trend. So now, you can have your iPhone, you can have any book and any song and any whatever just plucked out of the air, right? And with Amazon, that probably, it's only been one of the companies that's facilitated that. So in terms of its contribution to the world and to good and to human progress, I think Jeff Bezos probably should have more money, frankly, because that's the other point is, if you allow billionaires to create these things, right, I believe it's good. It's largely good for the world. Now, there are environmental considerations we can come back to. I believe that they're largely going to be solved by technology, myself, based on my own experiences, and just spent 3 years writing a book about that. If you tax them, this is what I don't think people like Gary seems to really understand incentives, because if you aggressively tax them, you don't create that wealth. And actually, there are tipping points where businesses go out of business, and so you'll never get the amazing things that Amazon's given you, or the electric cars that Tesla's given you, or the amazing aircraft that Boeing has given you. So you create much less wealth in aggregate. But government demonstrably spends. So tax is the government taking money off Bezos or Musk or whoever, or James Dyson or whoever it might be, right? And also other centimillionaires and people who are worth 10 million quid who are opening restaurant groups or whatever. And government, in the main, spends money exceptionally badly.
Yeah.
And I'd encourage, there's a book written by a guy called David Craig, no relation of mine. I have an uncle called David Craig, but it's not the same guy. He wrote a book in 2008 called Squandered. And it basically details just how much money the British government was wasting, Blair and Brown wasted. And it is eye-watering, and it's true all over the world. We all know it. So I think going back to the Benthamite good, if you want a better outcome for a bigger percentage of the population, you want billionaires to have as much money as possible, because they deploy it for the good of mankind. Nobody's holding a gun to your head and forcing you to buy stuff off Amazon or own a Tesla, and obviously fewer people want to own Teslas right now. But whereas the government is constantly confiscating things and forcing you to do things effectively with the threat of violence, police, magistrates, whatever, and that's becoming particularly bad in the UK. So I think that's really wrong ahead, and in a really random sort of final addendum to all of this, which will make me very unpopular, but I'm a big believer in, is the assumption that massive wealth inequality is a bad thing should be interrogated. Because there are a couple of things to say about that. So if there's massive wealth equality, firstly, there's a load of evidence from history that countries that are unequal, the overall experience of the population in aggregate is much better than countries that are equal. compare Switzerland or Singapore and North Korea, right? Equality of opportunity is a laudable aim. Equality of outcome is not. And because the second thing to say about this, which is really poorly understood, is the role of merit and compounding. Because basically, and again, we talked about this before, 60% of British adults don't understand the mathematics of compounding. But the reason...
That's what they say as well.
Yeah, exactly. when surveyed, the number's probably higher. But so very, very few people understand this, in my experience. It's like, if you are 1% better each month, like you got Bill, Bob and Ben, who are mates from university, and they're 20, right? And they're like health and wealth and life skills and knowledge and work ethic and everything, just score it at 100. Say they're all 100. They're 21 and they're at university, right? And say that Bill gets 1% better each month than Bob and Ben, right? Just 1%. He just reads one more book, 3 more books a year than the other two. He learns about accounting, neither of them do. He goes to the gym a little bit more. But just empirically say he gets about 1% better a month. By the time they're 30, they're probably all still mates. They're probably pretty similar. Bill's probably got a slightly better job. He's a little bit wealthier. He's got savings. He's got whatever. And the other two maybe. So let's say Ben stays stable at 100 for the whole time, and Bob gets fatter every year, drinks loads of booze, and has a coke problem, right? So by the time they're 30, there's not actually that much difference between them. There's a little bit of difference you can see. The bit everybody misses is by the time they're 60, Bill is a multi-millionaire. Bob is potentially dead or in prison, and Bill is having a really mediocre crap life in a really and that's just from Bill getting 1% better each month.
Yeah.
And what I genuinely think is absolutely gilt-edged true for anybody who is close to people who create large amounts of wealth is, in the large part, merit has got a huge role to play, because merit and compounding together over 30 years. So if you run those the maths is something like, if you get 1% better over 30 years, you'll be 35 times wealthier than the person who's flat. 35, not twice as wealthy, 35. That's 1% better each month. Now think about somebody who, Elon Musk famously, how many 100 books has he read, right? Somebody who's read 1,000 books, who is conversant with all elements of accounting, the complexities of accounting, who understands investment, who understands engineering, computer programming. Like, they have accrued all of those skills. Now, is that person perhaps getting 3 or 4% better every month than somebody who watches 5 hours of TV a day, eats terrible food, has never learned about nutrition and diet, doesn't do any exercise, has never read a single book, watches soap operas all day? Well, what people don't understand, and I know I sound like such a sort of raving, horrible right wing, but I think this is true. People might not like hearing this is true, is that over a few years, you don't see much difference, but over 30 or 40 years, somebody like Musk or Bezos, and by the way, as an entrepreneur, I can tell you from first-hand experience, what you go, without saying like too much of a prick, I've actually got up at 5 o'clock in the morning, 360 days a year for the last 6 years, and I'm still not making a profit.
Yeah,
it's friggin' hard, right? Yeah. And so, why would I'm still going and I'm still trying to do that. But actually, if the British government are just going to take all the fruits of all of that effort, if I finally, having risked all of my life savings to try and build what I'm building, if I finally get there and then I just have to give it all to the government, it's not so much because it's not so much about the paying the tax that people resent. It's the fact that you want economic control over your passion projects. As I say, you don't like a lot of very wealthy people actually live pretty frugal. Like they drive fairly frugal cars, and not all of them, but they wear pretty. Look at Mark Zuckerberg; he just wears black t-shirt and whatever, and he doesn't buy Gucci handbags or And it's like, I think that's really poorly understood. But it's the point. It's the combination of merit and compounding. And it's like, actually, you want to incentivize people who are willing to get 3 or 4 or 5% better than the next person every month, and they need to be rewarded. But crucially, not so they can spray their houses with champagne and whatever, but so that they can then go again and deploy that capital for the benefit of mankind. And I think it's really poorly understood in our society, particularly in this country, because when you let people like that do these things, the outcome for mankind is way, way better than if you get the government to do it and you take all their money and they bugger off abroad, which is what's happening at the moment.
And I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying this, that sanitation first started with kings and queens, and then it became more cost effective because more people wanted it, and economies of scale, and now all of a sudden everyone has in developed countries it's just a right. Like, you expect to have sanitation,
running water, hot showers, but it would be every day. No, exactly.
But it would have been royalties and the uber rich, and actually my dad has recently benefited from a technological advancement, which is, you've probably come across this, the Da Vinci intuitive surgical.
Yeah, the surgical machines. Yeah.
So using essentially robotic surgery, keyholes. Like, he had major surgery, and he's just got a couple of like bullet holes in him, and years ago that would have been essentially opening
massive
you up.
Cardiothoracic, yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Hugely dangerous. And
now this is people like my dad. My dad went on the NHS. So now NHS patients are benefiting from surgery where you don't have to worry about having a shaky hand.
Yeah.
You've got these, like, someone sits behind joysticks and a screen with like very non-invasive.
Helped by AI.
Yeah, helped by AI.
Yeah.
And the doctor now doesn't even need to be in the same country as the patient, which is another wild thing as well.
Yeah.
I'm not too sure what happens if the Wi-Fi goes down, but
not ideal.
But like, this is the benefit that people don't see, that the technology we're experiencing today, first, the inception of this idea, or the company that produced this idea, was many, many years ago.
And that's it. People just fundamentally don't understand wealth creation. It's a point I've made time and time again. Like, go back, so capital markets, the stock market and the bond market, if you go back to when they were invented and look at the trajectory of the human experience since, the world was awful. They're like, most human beings, were under the threat of violence all the time. Murders were much higher percentage of the population died from homicide.
Everyone was living in poverty.
Everyone was living in poverty. People had no teeth. I always go back to that. I think people really need to try and viscerally realise just how bloody awful life was for most human beings in history. And the thing that changed that was the technology of capital markets. Because without that, basically you had an agricultural revolution, you had a financial revolution, then you had an industrial revolution. We've subsequently had a technological revolution, and we're about to have a biotechnological revolution, in my view. And these things are, and if you don't take advantage of that, there's a huge amount. We should be much more concerned about personal responsibility. So take mental health challenges, right? Oh, iPhones are rubbish because everybody's got, problems with their serotonin and dopamine levels now. We know that. There's an epidemic of depression amongst teenagers. Okay, but you can choose not to have it, and actually I think this also happens time and time through history, is that new technologies create real problems, right? And disruption. And then we kind of learn our way past that, and actually then you get the fruits of it without the downside. And that's happened with the print. When the printing press, when Gutenberg's printing press came out, the aristocracy wanted to suppress the technology because they were worried about people reading and learning. And they thought that would, it would be too much, basically. It wasn't the aristocracy; it was the clergy. It was the Catholic Church, basically. And look, what would the world be like without reading? It's like now, there's a great expression, something like, people who don't read are no better than people who can't read. And I posted the thing about, so my publisher, Hodder, it's pretty harsh, isn't it? It's not quite true, but reading, I think, I posted a campaign by my publisher, which is basically, they're the fact that, I forget the name of it, it's annoying, I posted on LinkedIn the other day, but it's basically the fact that, reading for pleasure amongst children is at an all-time low.
Interesting.
And some terribly small percentage of kids actually own books, and blah, blah, and there's this amazing kind of empirically verifiable claim, which is reading for pleasure and reading books, not short articles and TikTok videos, but reading books and reading for pleasure is the highest correlate for life success, happiness, mental stability of anything above parental income, education. Like, literally, it's
wow.
And this is something I want to really get on my high horse about as a writer. Like, one of the reasons people are struggling financially, and they're struggling psycho-emotionally, and they're struggling with their health, is because people have stopped reading books.
Yeah.
Because all of the information you need to do a great job with your finances and a great job with your health and be happy, because I think that, being happy is hard work. That's a great. It's not just something that you can just switch on. It's something you have to be very knowledgeable about and understand how your brain works and how your serotonin levels work and dopamine works and what the best diet is for your mindset. And this this stuff is all out there in books, but nobody's reading. So everybody's got such bad information, and then they just want to blame the rich. And by the way, the rich tend to be people who've read all of that, taken it all on board, and then it's like, don't blame me for reading 1,000 books and starting a company. And but I think that merit point's really important, because I think it really the bit people don't understand is that if you work a little bit harder and you're a little bit smarter and you're a little bit more knowledgeable, a little bit more skillful, is the application of the compound effect I was saying, is that won't mean that your life's twice as better, 2 times better than the next person. Over 40 years, and given how global capital markets are now, that's why you get massive income disparity.
Yeah.
But it's actually for the good of mankind. What we want, we don't want to say, take all the money off that bastard billionaire. We want to make more people go on that journey.
I know.
We want to teach more people about, compounding and financial markets and living a good life.
And this is the point with Gary Stevenson's argument. He wants to bring the average down as opposed to the average up, and that's really, really hard. So he just wants to bring everyone down to the average rather than upwards.
It's the politics of blame and envy, right?
Yeah.
It's like, if my life's a bit shit, it's because that horrible billionaire has taken all my money. That's just bollocks. That's a very pessimistic way of looking at the world.
It's also an easy way of looking at the world.
Yeah, correct. Because you have to really think deeply. Well, look,
you don't have to work hard for it either if you just want to take it from somebody else.
These are really, I forget what the exact number is, but it's something like the average screen time of a British adult is 5 or 6 hours a day. Something like that, right? When surveyed, something like 65% of people admit to not having read a book in the last year.
Wow.
There's some amazing percentage of people who admit to basically taking no exercise at all. When, go look at Jamie Oliver's campaigns for nutrition in schools, like British people have really bad knowledge about food and how to cook stuff. And there's also this really fallacious idea that good nutrition is more expensive. So, that's true of of wild salmon or organic fillet steak for sure, but the cheapest things in the supermarket are onions, rice, carrots, whatever, right? And also the amount we all have to spend on food today is literally a fifth of what people had to spend in the 1950s of take-home pay. So it's just kind of it's bullshit. It's just a lack of knowledge and a lack of skills. People don't acquire the skills to know how to cook nutritious food, and these are all things we could solve if we set about solving them rather than going, it's all the fault of the billionaire. Anyway, I'm definitely rambling away, but
I grew up in a household where money was tight as a kid, but we had a fantastic diet because my mum used to there were 5 of us in the family, so she would cook stews, she would cook like chili con carne, she would cook lasagnas, but she would cook things that could be divided into 5 portions
and eaten over 2 or 3 days.
And there's a lunch for my dad the next day and all these sorts of things, but they were also whole food ingredients.
Exactly.
And that's something that. And now, like me and my brothers, we all have good diets.
You have that habit.
Exactly. And that came from my parents. It would have been easier for my parents probably to go and buy some chicken nuggets and chips.
Fish fingers and exactly. You still had fish fingers from time to time. I did.
My mum fish finger sandwich, of course, yeah.
But it's like, I was chopping onions in the kitchen when I was like 9, 8 or whatever. And I'm always amazed at how people, wow, you can chop an onion.
Well, you can't.
I mean, seriously, God, this is all a bit tangential, but I think that's right. And I think there's a lot. I mean, I guess we're rambling a bit, but to come back, Gary, vilifying the rich is a fundamentally pessimistic way of looking at the world, and a rate limiting. It's like it basically doesn't understand the merits of economic growth and wealth growth and growing the pie. And so I genuinely believe we're basically in a race between Mad Max and Star Trek, was what I always say. There's a chance, based on various demographic trends, and that we could, 100 years from now, the world could be a planet of 1 billion millionaires. Because population's topping out, every country that develops, birth rates go backwards. In places like Korea, they're estimating the population of South Korea is going to halve within the next 50 years or so, and that's going to happen all over the world. And then scientific development, wealth creation means we really could look forward to a future which would be way better for the planet, right? So rather than just vilifying rich people, why don't we just work to make that thing happen?
Yeah.
We should aspire to making everyone wealthy. And so and by the way, the way you don't achieve that by taking money away from billionaires. You really don't. You slow down the process of wealth creation massively.
I was trying to find something on my phone there, which was, I made some notes. He talks about the 70s as a period where there was high taxes. And I've done my research on the 1970s. No, I've spoken to my dad. So
it was awful.
It was,
correct.
And it's funny now that at the moment there's binman strikes in Birmingham. So
it's just like the winter of discontent.
Yeah, exactly.
In 79. Yeah.
So what people don't realise is that Gary Stevenson talks about this sort of like, I don't know, golden era, because people wealth inequality was lower. People didn't have regular electricity. They were literally like eating under candlelight sometimes. There was rubbish on the streets. People were poor.
I remember going to a supermarket in the early 80s, right? Because I'm that old. And a Safeway in New Malden in southwest London area, and it was basically all tinned food.
Yeah, of course.
It was like the quality of our food retail, the quality of everything was rubbish. Yeah. And it was. We recovered out of that, and yeah, you're right. We definitely don't want to go back to that.
No, absolutely. And my dad actually said a few years back, he's like, what people don't have the benefit from now is a time machine. So if you could go back in time and see.
But that's it, and that's the point of where I like to go back to what life was like in 1600 and 1800.
Yeah.
Because we have an epidemic of taking for granted the fact that we basically live in a paradise. I'm not belittling. I know there are problems, but. People have never been freer to build a good life. It's just that really fundamental things like compounding, like the fact that, apart from rock stars or actors or actresses, very few people in history have ever been like wealthy and sorted in their 20s.
Yeah.
And now we have this it takes 20, 30 years of understanding financial markets and compounding and getting more skilled and, whatever, to get to a point where your life is good and you're quite wealthy. But everyone now is in a massive hurry. And if you're not like really highly paid in your 20s, then it's Jeff Bezos' fault.
And social media doesn't help that, because now it's all about instant gratification.
And everybody also portraying a false narrative about what their life actually looks like. Yeah.
I want to segue into your book about the biotech sector.
Well, thank you, because I feel like we've just been randomly I'm making myself very unpopular, but I do.
Well, you are incredibly popular, and particularly as well on like the YouTube channel, the comments I was getting, like people love your message because it's one of actually more of positivity, and I think that we're going to of course, and some people might say, oh, you're picking holes in that person there who appears to have a very commonly accepted like good narrative, but I don't think that, like, my opinion is that Gary Stevenson is harmful to the population
and to the poorest in our society. That's the irony, and it's like I'm amazed he can't see it. But then he's a short bond trader. He's never looked at equity. He's never really understand wealth creation, as far as I can tell.
But also, have you noticed that he's gone missing now? Not gone missing as in...
Well, I've heard this theory that he's like a plant that basically... Because he came out of nowhere, was massively successful, got a huge following on social media, sold loads of books.
Yeah, he's made loads of money from his YouTube channel, and now he's gone on holiday.
And why not? I mean, why wouldn't you do that? I think that's probably a very philosophically enlightened thing to do. Once you've made... One thing I never really understand is once you get to a certain level of wealth... Why push to 10x that level of wealth? I mean, and that goes back to sort of the journey of lots of billionaires. Is for them, it's not about. Too many people sort of fail to understand that it's not about making billions of dollars. For certain nasty psychologically challenged folks, in US corporate world and elsewhere, there is a bit of that. Like, I'm worth more than that person. They're motivated by that, but I think that's receding. I think that's like. That people were like that in the 80s, the Gordon Gekko thing. I don't think many CEOs are like that nowadays. They're much more about the mission of what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the way the world is going at the moment as well. And again, I think this segues very nicely onto biotech, because it's something that you're very passionate about. You're doing a lot more research into this. I have I've scratched the surface because I'm an investor. So like, you want to look at all the emerging themes and technologies.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the excitement of the biotech sector and why it's so important for us.
Yeah, so it's as prosaic as the fact that basically, the last one I like to say, and for what it's worth, I've written a book called Our Future Is Biotech, which came out in August of last year, and I think you've had a chance to skim through it.
I haven't actually. No, I've not.
Oh, okay. Well, then this
I need to read it. Yeah, exactly.
I should have bought you a copy.
Well, I'm very happy to learn now and then read afterwards.
Okay, cool. I should have bought a copy to sort of brandish at the camera again. But,
we'll pop it up on the screen.
Yeah, actually, I have a copy, but we won't get down a rabbit hole. But so basically, what I say in the book is the last century has been about tech and physics. And the next century, from now on, is going to be about biotech and biology, right? It's a biological century. And the reason for that is, so kind of go back to the discussion we've been having, is truly, in a free market capitalist system, wealth is created by delivering human wants and solving human needs, right? So go back, why did construction and architecture deliver? Because we need places to live and work. Why did shipping develop? Because we need to ship stuff around the world. Why did the airline industry develop? Because we want to fly around. That's created trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of real wealth. And so you basically create real wealth by solving human problems and delivering human wants and needs. By the way, not true of most of the things that governments do.
Yeah, exactly.
An awful lot what they do is by edict, But anyway, I don't want to get back down the rabbit hole there. But and the most valuable, intractable remaining problems we have as a species today are problems of biology. So the most obvious one that everybody goes to when they think about biotech is therapeutics, is curing disease. Can we cure cancer? Can we sort out dementia? Can we sort out Parkinson's? Can we sort out elderly care? Can we sort out diabetes and obesity and challenges, mental health challenges? Massive rise in autism and ADHD and all that stuff that's going on. We'll come back to. That's all in the book. So, but actually, and this gets missed a lot, and it's a really important part of the message. It's biotech is about way more than just healthcare, because the other problems of biology we confront as a species are, microplastics in our oceans, heavy metals having leached into our soils, the destruction of the microbiome in our soils, and the food's becoming much less having less nutritional value in it. All of our problems of environmental degradation are problems of biology. Deforestation, loss of mangrove swamps, loss of habitat, loss of animals, loss of fish stocks, whatever. Those are all problems of biology. And actually, a really funky, interesting one analogous to that, another problem is, you probably know this, but Moore's law was coined by Gordon Moore, one of the founders of Intel in the 60s, but it goes all the way back to the steam age, amazingly enough. Work's been done on the show, which is basically the idea that processing power per pound or dollar spent doubles every 18 to 24 months. And that's that incredible trajectory, that technological trajectory that was the reason that an iPhone's more powerful than the computer that put a man on the moon in the 60s, right? By like millions. I think the processing power per pound spent in my lifetime from 1975 to 2025 is up a billion X, right? But the interesting thing about Moore's law is that a lot of people are concerned that we're now actually running into the limits of physics.
Yeah.
And that trajectory can't carry on anymore, because you go to like Taiwan Semiconductor and ASML, this amazing Dutch company that makes the machines that make the silicon wafers. They've been putting more and more and more and more, zeros and ones on chip boards for, year after year and for decades. And that's why we've had this billion X uplift in processing power. But we're now running up against the limits of physics. You just can't make any smaller.
They go upwards now, don't they? Looking at
they stack, and they're all sorts of. But a promise from biology is so computing is all based on 0-1 transistor based, silicon based computing that we've had, and that's gone so far, and it's remarkable what we've achieved, and all these new tricks to keep that going. DNA based computing has 4 bases, not 2. So it can be exponentially more. If you configure DNA to deliver a processing outcome, it could theoretically be exponentially. It could basically step change processing power and enable us to carry on with the Moore's law exponential for the next however many decades, right? And and quantum computing is another element of that, which is a whole different thing. But then, so something like I think I said this in our last interview, but there are technologies being worked on at the moment where because basically you can store 215 million gig of data in 1 gram of DNA.
Wow.
And that, if you work that up to petabytes and yottabytes and exabytes, the basic idea is that you could put all of the data that humanity has created in the whole history of, since we started writing, 600 years ago, or printing books and stuff, could go in something the size of like a Ford Transit van using DNA-based storage. But even more mind-blowing and exciting is that this technology does not need power. Because basically if you configure the DNA in a certain shape that then stores the data, you can then so you could have like exabytes of data in something the size of a sugar cube and just put it up on a shelf with no power and then come back and read off it whenever you need the data later on, right? So imagine that some billionaires get hold of that technology and develop it for what it's worth, which will happen. But imagine that basically means that you don't need electricity for all these blade servers and human storage can be without using electricity.
The majority could be offline, basically. Is what you're saying.
And then you just go and plug it into a reader as and when you want to get it on. So look, this is all really frontier stuff and a bit science fiction, but so was a television 80 years ago, or radio, or or airplanes. I mean, well, yeah, they're 120. What is it? Wright Brothers was 1904, right? So it's just over a century. So all this stuff. So basically, biotech is going to solve a load of these problems, and by virtue of doing that, it's going to create trillions and trillions and trillions of value, right? So if you think, Novo Nordisk is a diabetes, and they have the GLP-1 drugs, Wegovy, Ozempic, which have become great hits as celebrities. And by virtue of those two things, so basically a weight loss drug and diabetes drugs, it's like I don't know what it is now, $400 billion company or whatever. So what is a business going to be worth that has an effective pan-tumoral treatment that cures all tumours, all cancers, all solid tumours, which I think is not that many years away, truly. That's going to be a multi-trillion-dollar company. It will probably be worth more than Apple, right?
And will be doing good for the world.
Yeah, correct.
Despite how rich the shareholders are, or the founder is, or the CEO gets paid.
We discussed this last time. I always go back to this. Is like, paracetamol costs pennies.
Yeah.
Gene therapies right now cost $1 million, but 20, 30, 40 years from now, they hopefully will cost pennies. Because paracetamol, when it was first synthesized by German pharmaceutical companies in, I think, like the 1890s or whatever it was, or aspirin at least, would have been relatively very expensive. And we had this conversation last time, but like a television in the 1950s was like a year's salary. and you need, whenever any new technology comes along, it has to be priced high to compensate the people who've provided the capital to figure out how to deliver that new technology. Yeah. And again, that's something that's really poorly understood, I think.
I saw this article yesterday. Gene editing cures a child of a rare disease in world's first. What is gene editing?
Okay,
for
so that
layperson.
Right. So there's a gene editing technology called CRISPR. And I'm not a clustered, repeating, palindromic. I'm going to embarrass myself. I can't actually remember what it stands for. I should probably go away and look that up and make sure I know what it stands for. But anyway, it won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2020. And it's been around since about 2011, 2012. And it basically enables scientists to correct at the level of the genome. So you've got billions and billions of pairs of the genetic makeup in all of your cells. So there are 10,000 diseases in the world that are caused by a defect in a single bit of your genetic code.
Wow.
By a single genetic defect. And theoretically now, so 20-ish years ago, we figured out how to read genetic code. Well, 2001, 2002. And that took 13 years and $3 to $5 billion and thousands of scientists. Now you can read the genetic code of anything, you, me, a plant, a pig, whatever, a snail, whatever you might want to look at, in like 1 or 2 hours for $100. So that exponential is actually even more powerful than Moore's law, right? And that's that's another reason why this is so exciting, because the ability to do that means that we can do lots of stuff that we couldn't do before. So first we can read the genetic code. That's a huge development, and it's not like punitive. It doesn't cost millions of dollars to do anymore. You can do it. Normal people can do it in normal labs on whatever they want to look at. The next bit, though, is what does that all mean? Like, because it's like, okay, there's billions of genetic data points here. And it took then another, say, 20 or so years for thousands of academic papers all over the world for, researchers to say, well, if this gene is defective, it will cause this disease. If these 3 genes are defective in this combination, it will cause this disease or this type of disease. So that's taken years, and that's obviously still in process. There's exabytes of data being generated all the time they're called next generation sequencing machines. They're reading genetic data of whatever thing they're looking at. And bacteria or viruses, all the way down to the microbial level too. So you basically, we've got the ability to read it. We've got the ability, crucially, this is where AI and machine learning comes in, because you take this incredibly massive, complicated data set, and you need to say something substantive about it. Like, is this going to cause disease? Or is this genetic thing going to do this certain thing? Change the color of, you could, like, certain jellyfish have fluorescent markers in them. You could theoretically make us fluorescent. But that was, so the next thing, that was a bit of a tangential aside, but, we'll have glow in the dark carrots, or oranges, or apples, or whatever. But basically, when you do that really complex analysis, you need to be able to go up to the cloud and interrogate tens of thousands of academic papers to find the answer to what that thing means. So that's all been building for 20 years, and it's getting better, literally like month after month after month. It's bigger and better and more accurate. And the final bit to your question, sorry, the standard very long answer to your question is, so let's say you've been able to read the genetic code, you've established that this thing causes sickle cell anemia, which is a horrendous disease. And then we have an ability to exquisitely edit it, to snip it, to change the genetic code to get rid of that problem. And so I don't know what that story was you were mentioning earlier, but the first approved drug to treat, actually, which is for sickle cell anemia and beta thalassemia, it was the blood disorders, was approved. Actually, it was first approved by the MHRA in the UK in, I think, December 23, and then by the US FDA in like the first quarter of last year. And, it's a $2 million, off the top of my head, it's like a $2 million drug. But what's exciting about it is it's the promise, it's basically a once and done miracle cure for a disease that previously would take 20 or 30 years off somebody's life and put them in enormous pain and regular hospital visits. These are miracle cures, and what should happen over the course of the next 10, 20, 30 years is these miracle cures, the price of them will come down massively. Yeah.
You mentioned something earlier which has become actually quite an important topic on the podcast, because a few of the guests that have come on recently they're entrepreneurs that have ADHD. Right. And you mentioned earlier on about ADHD and autism, and that's been rising in
massively.
Kids.
Yeah.
Having researched that, like what's your understanding of that?
So there are any number of kind of arguments, theories, and I think there's still fairly material uncertainty. What there isn't uncertainty about, by the way, which is a big misconception that you hear a lot, is that the only reason that autism is massively on the rise is because we can now diagnose autism, and before we couldn't. Like, it's just if you didn't understand the condition, or clinicians didn't have the tools and the habits around diagnosing a child with autism like 50 years ago, then obviously autism would be much lower, because we weren't looking for it. We didn't really understand what it was. Or ADHD, or all sorts of other similar conditions, actually. My reading of it and the research I did for the book, there are a few things. And Bobby Kennedy in the States right now. It's going to be very interesting to see what there are question marks over the food chain, and the fact, and I think there's a kind of smoking gun around. So basically, autism has been massively on the rise in the developed world. There are all these diseases of modernity that come in affluent developed countries that have not come in developing countries.
Interesting.
And so there's a huge amount around the way we've, like industrial farming, the way we've disrupted the food chain, even so there's the instance of diabetes in Finland is 6 times higher than the instance on I think it's the Karelian bit of Russia, on the other side of the Finnish-Russian border, even though the people are genetically the same. So there's something there. And similarly, like migrants African immigrants to the UK and Pakistani and Indian immigrants to the UK pick up a whole load of diseases and modernity that aren't present in India or Pakistan or Africa. So there's definitely a sort of smoking gun there in terms of it's chemicals in the system, it's our water networks, I think it's leaching of heavy metals into soils. There's all this stuff. It's basically how we've changed our relationship with the microbial world. And we've done that far more aggressively in the West than we have in less developed parts of the world. So I think that's pretty clear, and there's a whole section in my book about all of that. Actually, when it comes to autism and ADHD, there's a pretty well established positive correlation with parental age. So that's because I had my kids at 42 and 44. Right. And my son is in the process of being looked at for autism. So it's pretty close to my heart. But it's so basically the human organism, as originally conceived for hundreds of thousands of years since we evolved from, Charles Darwin style from apes or whatever happened. We're basically designed to have kids as soon as not long after we've been through puberty, like every other animal. You're not designed to reach puberty, which is probably why teenage boys have just such a rough time of it, right? Because they have to wait years before anybody wants to have a crack.
It's very funny that you say this, because I've got a 15-month-year-old puppy,
right?
And he's with that in dog years or in adult years.
He's just on the cusp of he's a teenager.
He's a teenager, but he is just. You can see he is like a horny teenager.
Yeah, going off like a frog in a sock, as my Australian friends would say.
But you can see it. He has animal instincts, and he will just go and try and get what he wants.
Yeah, and so that exactly biologically, 16-year-old boys should be having children with 15-year-old girls. As slightly sick as that sounds in our society, that's what happened for the whole of human history, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And that's what the biological imperative is. And then, life expectancy, in caveman era was probably, you'd be lucky to live into your 30s. And infant mortality infant mortality in 1800 was 40% of kids died before they hit their 5th birthday. 40%.
Wow.
In the UK in 1800.
Wow.
It shows how far again, the fruits of modernity. Yeah. So parental age, basically, a 42-year-old man and a 39-year-old woman having a child inherently implies a much higher risk of all sorts of medical conditions, and there's a clear correlation with the rise of autism in that.
Wow.
Sadly, because sort of culturally and socially, many of us want to make those choices, whether that's selfish or not. That's just the way the world's sort of evolved and calibrated nowadays. The good news is, though, and this is all part of, I put this all in the book, is that we're now only just now, with all those technological developments I talked about, like being able to read genetic code, being able to look at an extant stock of academic papers that have looked at that bit growing all the time. We're beginning to we are sort of on the cusp of understanding all this stuff much better, and then not long thereafter we'll probably have remedial treatments, and we'll be able to improve things. And there's this, so with autism, for example, there's a lot of chat about it's neurodivergent. Autism doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It just means your brain is wired differently. But I think, if the way it manifests is for example, massive tantrums and a child scratching themselves until they bleed, or, all sorts of things that are really unpleasant and things that you would rather your child is not going through. If there was a treatment that enabled your child to be neurodivergent, but also not manifest horrendous things that are awful for them and for their parents and for everyone else, you'd probably want to develop that, in my opinion. It doesn't decry the fact that they're neurodivergent, their brains work slightly differently, but it's something that can help retard the things that are really problematic, and particularly for people with severe autism who can end up in a home, if you could remedy that so they could live a normal life and find a life partner and hold down a job, and I think that would be a good thing to do, right?
From your understanding, is it something that you're born with, or is it something that, because people now talk about ADHD in adults, etc. Yeah. Is it something that's you're born with? Is it something that can come on over time?
So I'm a massive. It's sort of slightly to the nature nurture debate, isn't it? But it's I personally think that biology is so unbelievably complicated. Yeah. That any number of you will have a genetic predisposition to epilepsy or or whatever, or depression, right? there's plenty of work showing that people might have a genetic predisposition, but that can be overridden by nutrition, by your thoughts.
Yeah.
Literally, as wooey and sort of Californian as that sounds, like there's a great book called The Expectation Effect by a guy called David Robson, which basically, there's all this academic evidence now that kind of what you expect to get in your life is what people get.
Yeah.
As mad as that sounds,
So both in manifestation.
Yeah, but it's like loads of academic work being done by top universities that's proven that out. Whether that's sports psychologists have used it for ages, like top tennis players manifesting getting the shot in, or footballers manifesting getting the penalty or whatever. But at the level of things like, I believe I'm a really healthy individual. Like if you believe you're healthy, if you believe you're fit, it actually manifests in reality. And the fascinating thing is they're beginning to understand why that is at a biological and genetic level.
Wow.
Because you can this is, again, I'm going to do what I did a minute ago with CRISPR. But so there's genetics, there's your genetic code, which is fixed, but there's epigenetics, which is the epigenetic expression of your genome. So you are genetically X, but the way your genome expresses at the cellular level is your epigenetics, which can be Y, Z, A, B, C, D. So that's a bit of a crap example. But to try and explain that, a really good vignette is that a caterpillar and a butterfly are genetically identical, but the epigenetic expression of their genomes are obviously wildly different, such that one of them is basically a worm and one of them can fly and is really beautiful, right? And similarly, your genome is the same in your heart cells or your muscle cells or your lung cells or whatever, but obviously epigenetically the expression is different to then have created a heart or a lung or a skin or whatever. So it's a fascinating field that I think the really exciting thing is we're just going to really, really begin to understand all this stuff. AI and machine learning is going to help us.
Yeah.
Because the variables, it's billions and billions of variables. The analogy I've used, the other one I've used, which might make you smile, is you might be a bit young for this, and your viewers might, but the original Batman films, Michael Keaton, the first one was 1989, and Jack Nicholson was the Joker.
Yep.
And Kim Basinger was.
I hope most people have seen that.
Yeah, and Prince did the soundtrack. It was a huge marquee. Yeah. It was the first film in the UK when they came up with the 12. It was the first ever 12. Okay. That's when 12 came out in the cinemas. I remember because I was 13 or whatever and snuck through. But the reason I mention it is because in the second one, and I've got Batman, whatever, I can't remember the title of it, but not the Christian Bale ones, the one from the early 90s. Batman basically, the citizens of Gotham are getting poisoned and their skins falling off.
Yeah.
And Batman goes away with his supercomputer in the Batcave and figures out that it's a combination. It's like if you have the deodorant, you don't get poisoned. If you add the deodorant and the skin cream, then and he figures out this. Anyway, it's a very spurious analogy, but the point is, if you times that by many, many billion, right, that level of interaction complexity, how your genome and epigenome are working, how your microbiome is working, how your virome is working. So there's a great book called 10% Human by a brilliant lady called Alana Colleen. Sorry, Alana, if I've pronounced your name incorrectly, but which basically makes the point. It's been superseded now, but it was thought for a few decades that we are only 10% human DNA and 90% bacterial DNA.
Wow.
So you and I are basically, now it's more like 50-50. It's basically we are 30-ish trillion human cells and 30-ish trillion bacterial cells sitting here. You're just a bag of bacteria, basically. And 280...
Well, so are you.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to make it personal. And 280 trillion... viral fragments, because viruses aren't actually cells, they're viral fragments. And so my point about that is, when it comes to autism or ADHD or any of these, or diabetes or obesity or depression or Alzheimer's or cancer or whatever, is that the complexion of your virome and your microbiome, your bacteriome, is every bit as important for your health and your mental health and everything as you as a human being. And we're only really finally being able to understand that and interrogate it, and it's incredibly complex, the interaction of that. And your thought, it's been shown that your thoughts can manifest physical changes in your body, right? So
there's a crazy study that was done where somebody was recovering from a stroke or something, and they were thinking about their legs working, and in the end they began the muscles continued to work, and eventually they built up the strength, which is
Well, so there was similarly there was a famous study, and I can't remember where it was from, but basically about they got a bunch of kids to imagine learning how to play the piano. So they didn't play a piano, they just did it in their head for many weeks or months. And then when they finally sat down on the piano, they were able to play the piano.
Wow.
Because it's the power of the mind, because the muscle memory is entirely internal, right? And obviously it helps. It's aided by actually doing the thing.
Yeah.
It's possible. No, fighter pilots use that in training, and Formula One drivers do it.
Of course.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of the times they're practicing for the race, but not on the track and in the car.
Yeah.
They're literally sitting there.
Yeah. Well, we remember from the movie Rush.
Yeah.
Where, Chris Hemsworth is doing that, I think.
Have you also seen the film Free Solo?
No, that's the guy that amazing climb. Yeah, what's
El Capitan?
Dean Potter?
No, he is one of them. Alex Honnold, his name is.
Oh right, yeah.
And but he visualizes all of the very difficult moves that he has to do on the wall, and he knows. The guy is probably also autistic or something, so be able to memorize almost every single step and like where his hand goes.
Yeah.
But he did that. So when he climbed without any ropes, he was sat in the car beforehand, basically going through,
manifesting what he's about to do.
Exactly, and he's preparing himself for that.
So there's a what's it called? There's a brilliant book, Stephen Kotler, Superhuman, I think it's all Superman, and it's basically it's all of that. It's the unbelievable progress we've made at the frontiers of sports like big wave surfing and like I forget the name of the guy, the world's best ever skateboarder, who
Tony Hawk.
It's not Tony Hawk. It's somebody. That's the thing. But he basically they built a ramp for him to jump the Great Wall of China, and he broke his ankle on the last day of training in a practice run. He broke his ankle, and then he still jumped the Great Wall of China the next day when he was game on with all the cameras and stuff. And it's like, anyway, this is definitely a rambling random one. Sorry, this is like the random show. But all of that stuff is all part and parcel of a similar thing. It's like we are across the piece. We're pushing at the frontiers of what is possible. At least some people are.
Yeah,
and it's really exciting.
But a lot of people also probably don't want to hear that, because it's going back to the the pessimism debate earlier on, or the optimism debate. It's like doing things that take time and that are really hard.
Yeah,
it's
hard.
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah,
but I think that's the point. That's what I keep coming back to time and time again. That stat I've repeated a few times. Like more than 60% of British adults don't understand compounding. I think that is almost the single most important statistic for the malaise of this country and people struggling, because anything, whether it's your financial affairs or your health or whatever, something that's just so poorly understood is the compound effect. Is everything takes quite a long time and consistency in doing it. Like even something as something as prosaic as, I make this point in the book, doing press ups every day.
Yeah.
The difference between somebody who does 20 press ups every day from the age of 20 to the age of 60 and somebody who doesn't, just 20 press ups, it takes like less than a minute.
Yeah.
It's hundreds of thousands of press ups. It's hundreds of thousands of press ups, right? The difference between somebody who walks 5 kilometers a day or 2 kilometers a day. What's that? 2 kilometers a day, 730 kilometers a year, right? So for 40 years, from 20 to 60, the 60-year-old who's walked 2 kilometers a day has walked, 720, 1,000 a year, 40,000 kilometers more than the person who doesn't. Which one of them's going to be fat? Which one of them's going to be in quite good health? And it's these people just totally fail to understand that it's tiny differences that make enormous outsized outcomes. And there are loads of books about it. Again, it's books.
Yeah.
Jeff Olson, The Slight Edge, amazing book. Like all about this stuff. And what's the other? Atomic Habits.
Yeah, Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's a fantastic book.
I think we should literally force children at gunpoint to read some of these books.
But they're going 15, going to force them to watch Adolescence instead.
Yeah, which I've not watched that.
No, I haven't. But
Kemi Badenoch got in trouble, didn't she, from the BBC reporters for not having watched Adolescence? And she's like, "Yeah, I'm a politician. Like, why do I
read your book instead?" I mean, everyone will be more financially literate. No. What technology are you most excited about?
I think big picture. I do think microbiome. I think like really understanding that interplay of bacteria and viruses with our genetic makeup once we've fully locked down, understood that, that's going to just pay massive dividends for human health and also for the health of our environment. So there's a thing called bioremediation, which is basically we've completely, especially in America, they've destroyed their agricultural soils, and that's a big part of the health epidemic in America. Because all their food has no nutritional content, is terrible unless you are very wealthy, can afford to pay for really nice organic stuff from a trendy little organic farm. Yeah, exactly, which is eye-wateringly expensive. But, that's not a solution that the current population of Earth can't afford to all have wonderful, lovely organic food the way it's currently produced, right? We need industrial farming just to sustain like 8 billion people. But but I think as we understand the microbiome and things like bioremediation, we can potentially solve that problem for everyone. And that's really exciting in terms of curing cancer, or rolling back mental health epidemics that we're suffering from. Like literally, really miracle-y cure-y stuff. Just like we're going to alter your genetic makeup and your bacterial makeup. And actually, precision medicine will be able to do inexpensively a diagnosis of your exact, your cellular structure, your genetic structure, your microbiome, the bacteria you have in you, the makeup of that, the viral stuff you have in you, and go, right, that means that you've got a predisposition to have this disease. Wow. Take this pill, it'll be fine. And it'll be personalised to you.
There is talk about this at the moment. Like there are companies out there that say they do this.
It's pretty. There's like personalised nutrition based on a blood tests and stuff. But
like a very small poo sample or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think they're all very exciting technologies, and it's all a bit nascent. And I think a lot of it's also it's a bit of a pain in the arse. It's all like, oh, I've got to send this back and do that. This stuff will all get a lot more common and a lot easier, I think, in the fullness time.
Just over time, more cost effective, which is what we want to then impact more and more people.
Yeah.
Because at the moment, people might say, oh, the subscription or the test or whatever. I'm very lucky to benefit from just an annual health check at work
provided by your employer. Exactly.
95% of the population just will not have that. But at some point soon, hopefully the cost of these things just becomes so low, or it becomes so critical that they make it cost effective, or it's but it will go one step further, or no, one step further, but multiple steps further, which will be everyone will have their insulin checked more regularly.
It'll be in real time. What's that?
Is it the Whoop?
Whoop. I've got a Whoop on, which I'm enjoying. It's cool, but in a few years' time, that will be constantly the data that will do will be so much better, and that's what people don't understand compounding, and people underestimate exponentials. We have honestly, the world potentially, if we don't listen to people like Gary Stevenson, the world 10, 15 years from now could be absolutely extraordinary.
I know.
And the trouble and the irony is that mental health will be even worse. Because if you took your point about your dad, was it your dad saying about getting a time machine? Yeah, if you went in a time machine right now to 1800 and plucked your average farm labourer out of a field a mile up the road there, right, and dropped them into Canary Wharf right now, they would be like,
which planet am I on?
Yeah, it would be literally like science fiction, or showed them a modern football stadium, or a supermarket. Because that's the other. I was going to say, it's like we can talk about really edgy tech stuff and iPhones and flying cars and whatever, but something as prosaic, capitalism and if you walk into a supermarket, just stop and look at what's in front of you in a supermarket, right? Every single product in that supermarket is probably being, so I'm talking about things like Branston pickle, or like branded cheeses or whatever. There's a family that's millionaires because they created that. And there was blood, sweat and tears and innovation and making a better pickle than the next bloke in the next village, and then the hard work of getting in front of the precursors to Tesco and Sainsbury's and making that brand. There's an amazing story that's created wealth, and often for a family that still, over many generations, of every single product in the supermarket. Now, what people underestimate is, would you rather go into a supermarket like in communist Russia in 1960, where there are none of those things?
Yeah.
Where you are lucky to get a loaf of friggin' bread.
That's
what people underestimate.
This is going a long way back now, but the reason why you see pineapples on things like the on the Wimbledon
on the
Trophy.
top of St Paul's Cathedral.
Yeah. Like in some really random places, you see a pineapple.
Yeah.
And the reason why that is because the first people that took ships away from the country and then they brought stuff back, they brought back pineapples.
Yeah, yeah.
And they were shown to be like an ostentatious display of wealth.
So expensive. Exactly.
So expensive.
Yeah.
So like, look how rich I am. I have a pineapple.
Yeah, 100%.
And you go to M&S now and they're chopped up into small little pieces in a plastic box for you to eat.
which, to be fair, are still quite expensive. But, people on an average wage probably have that from time to time. We live in a complete paradise. And the tragedy is people just completely take... It's a well-known human psychological challenge is hedonic adjustment. Hedonic adaptation is just basically like something completely remote. Like, I mean, I wrote this in a piece a few years ago, but like, just if you actually stop and look at your mobile phone, I remember when I was like 8 and Star Wars came out. There's no way I could have got a video of Star Wars. A VHS or Betamax cassette of Star Wars was like, I think it was like £100. And it came out like 5 or 6 years after Star Wars was in cinemas. And it was like, you'd go and look at this video shop and have a copy of Star Wars. Like, contrast that with what we have today. Well, I can pick that thing up and get like any Star Wars film like immediately and listen to it on the train home.
It's
tonight.
crazy.
But we take it all completely for granted. Like,
of course we do,
the stuff we have today would have been seen as unbelievably exciting and miraculous and fantastic and abundant as recently as like 20 years ago, but we take it completely for granted. Now, I think we need to do a much better job at teaching ourselves not to take it for granted.
Yeah. What would be your key message to somebody in that case then who does take it for granted?
Well, I'll go back to it again. Read.
Yeah, okay.
I quite often get asked by parents of people in their teens or early 20s. They're at uni or doing their A levels or whatever. Oh, will you speak to my son or my daughter about financial services or career or whatever? And time after time, I'm the boring old bastard. What's the number one thing I should be doing? Read. Yeah. The first interview question I would always ask interviewers, tell me the last 3 books you've read. And if somebody fluffs, they'll go, they haven't read any, I'm not interested. And I know that sounds really harsh, but that's just, if you don't, reading will give you the answers to, almost everything. I genuinely believe that, whether it's nutrition or fitness or financial services or whatever. And one of the biggest tragedies of our age is that we've lost the culture of reading.
What are the last 3 books you read?
Oh, obviously, Our Future Is Biotech, How to Make the World Live on Less and Best the Rest. My 3, not only because I'm reading some really cheesy book and I forget the name of the author, but it's called How to Make $10 Million Online, basically. So it's nice. Teaching me all about, because I need to massively improve my use of social media. I need to add shorts to my YouTube. I haven't had time because I've been writing books for the last 3 years, but I've got a whole bunch of stuff to do. I am reading... there's a guy called Daniel Silver who's written a load of spy novels that are very James Bondy. It's like this Israeli guy, Gabriel Allon, and I'm probably my 5th one of those I read at night before I go to sleep. So fiction stuff. What else have I got on the go? I've just been reading Outlive by Peter Attia.
Peter Attia. What if anyone doesn't want to read his books, just go on any podcast that he's been on. Modern Wisdom one that he was on. I've actually got a note of it, which episode it was, because it was insane. He talks about some incredible stuff.
I need to. So I've read that, and also Lifespan by David Sinclair is another one. But I'm trying to visualize. I've literally got about 30 books on the floor. Because I tend to, I will always be reading 4 or 5 at the same time, whichever one I feel like on the train today. I bought whichever one up.
That's very normal, I think. By the way, some people, I do the same. Yeah. And I was listening to a podcast with Naval Ravikant, who again as well is an amazing, amazing man. But he says that it depends on what mood he's in. But he's got a book for bedtime, which might be fiction, and he's got some non-fiction stuff. But he often, it might seem like a radical idea, but pick up the book, and if you're not enjoying the start of it, just go back a few chapters forwards.
I mean, he also talks about the merits of if you think a book's rubbish, just stop reading it.
Just stop reading it, exactly.
Force yourself to get to the end. That, by the way, just I sense we're probably, how are we for time?
We're probably a few minutes left.
Okay, but because as a general comment as well, so you mentioned Modern Wisdom.
Yeah,
Chris Williamson is a genius. He's brilliant, right? Tim Ferriss was the original Mac Daddy, right? The GOAT or whatever. I've been listening to Tim Ferriss since day one. I've read Tim Ferriss's books, and what I was going to say is, my God, are we lucky in this day and age? I think, so Tim Ferriss has done like 800 or something. Chris Williamson's done similar. I reckon I've listened to 95% of them all the way through, because I tend to wake up at like 4 a.m. and if I'm not quite ready to get up yet, I just put an earphone in and doze through one of Tim Ferriss' podcasts. And I've been doing that since 2014 or whenever so again, it's that my point about press ups, 20 press ups every day.
Yeah.
You'll have done hundreds of thousands of press ups. Listen to a podcast every other day, here and there on the train, blah, blah, blah. I will have listened to comfortably over 1,000 podcasts, 2-3 hour long podcasts, right? And I don't think I could be building my business or writing my books or doing these sorts of interviews or forming thoughts throughout if I hadn't, along with the books. And to have nobody in the whole of the rest of human history had access to that. I think Tim Ferriss's stock of podcasts with leading luminaries of like acting and business and fund management and politics and everything, right? And exercise, and is one of the single best extant sources of knowledge that's ever been created in human history.
Yeah, I know.
So genuinely, I think the guy's an absolute genius, and we all owe him a debt of gratitude. And Chris Williamson, bless him, so annoying. He's like this annoyingly good-looking British dude from Newcastle who was, I mean, but what a legend. I mean, he was on Love Island.
I know.
And then now he's so articulate and eloquent. I mean, I'm such a pathetic fanboy. It's annoying because he's like 15 years younger than me. It's like, where did I get that?
I love it. I credit him for being one of the reasons why I started this podcast.
Yeah.
And Tim Ferriss. I was a early listener of Tim Ferriss. Just actually to finish up, what's your favourite Tim Ferriss episode?
So hard. So it's so funny. I literally, on my ludicrous to-do list of 8,000 things in my iNotes, one of them is to gradually build a Spotify playlist of all the best podcasts.
Wow.
Because there are so many of them. And I can literally go, I want to listen to one of my favourite Tim Ferriss podcasts, and I'll get on it. I'll be on it for like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
What about, I'm trying to remember, because there are hundreds, right? I'd say straight to the top of my head though, Patrick Collison, who is like, again, like I think he was 32 or something when he did it. So Patrick Collison and his brother John, I think, are two Irish legends who founded Stripe.
Okay.
And they're like uber ridiculously intelligent and massive fans of books. Like make all these points. Huge. He's like read everything you could possibly imagine by the time he's like 22, and funnily enough, is now a billionaire.
Yeah.
He's taken all that knowledge and put 2 and 2 together, and he's good at software programming, and he seems like he's a brilliant. He also talks. That podcast was so good because he talked about how we really should be looking at the experiences of South Korea. Because Tim Ferriss saying, like, why are you interested in economics? You're like a computer programmer, you run a tech company, like what? You have this huge interest in economics. And he said, well, because we all should be studying like what Taiwan and South Korea and Singapore and Australia and have done, and to figure out how to get Nigeria and Kenya and, or Paraguay or wherever, to have, because there are countries in the world that have done an amazing job and now have tons of, have very low crime rates. Everybody's wealthy. Everybody has fantastic healthcare, blah, blah, blah. We should be looking at those countries.
Just learn from someone who's already doing it.
Yeah, something that Gary Stevenson has not done, by the way, in my considered opinion. Like if you are a student of economic history and comparative economics success of various different economic models, it's really clear what works and delivers the best outcome in the fairest societies. Because that was another I was going to go back to income inequality is also a signifier of fairness. Because if income inequality is a function of merit times compounding, as we were arguing earlier, then you should have income inequality. It shows that society is more fair.
Yeah,
which I know
it's fair because it rewards
merit and effort.
Merit. Yeah, exactly.
Correct.
Yeah.
And look, it does that imperfectly, but ironically, the more government intervention there is,
that's right. That's my belief.
The less fair society becomes, the less merit-based it becomes, because it's your Keir Starmer's mate or Boris Johnson's mate in the last, and you're now a millionaire.
Yeah,
like that. But that guy who Vince, what's his name, who's ruining the countries. But the reason why our electricity prices are egregiously eye-wateringly expensive is because of the policies of Ed Miliband and his mate's Tory donor, what's his name, giving 5 million quid to the Labour donor. And I know the Tories were they're all as bad as each other.
Well, this is if you look at the industries where the prices have fallen the most and risen the most, the ones where they've risen the most are
Government
ones where there's government intervention.
Yeah, exactly
It'll be healthcare, it'll be education, it'll be oil and gas and all those sorts of things. Like oil and gas, I think they charge they tax 78% on domestic oil and gas companies.
Well, I want to write a piece about the madness of windfall taxes and how it's terrible for society.
Yeah.
Like it's like, and also because 90% of people go, oh, they made X million pounds in the boat. Like they don't understand what margins are.
No,
like,
I know.
But anyway,
there was actually we're going to finish on this point, I think, because we're going to go and get some lunch. But
yeah, good idea.
But so excuse me. During the pandemic, actually, it was. BP had record profits, or not just after the pandemic. They had record profits, and everyone was like, our oil and gas prices are going up, and how can they be benefiting? The biggest benefit they got was from a tax incentive that was offered to them by the government for shutting down North Sea oil and gas fields. Yeah. They gave them a tax rebate, which essentially went straight onto the bottom line of their profits. Yeah. For shutting down oil and gas fields, which we then needed during the cost of living crisis. And it just shows, I think, the
more intervention, the crapper it is.
Exactly.
For sure. But also, people don't... That BP thing, I wrote a piece about it at the time, but like they'd just written down $100 billion from their Russian investment as well. So like, if you tax the crap out of BP every time they have a big year... then you won't have any oil 20 years from now. And because also it's a global playing field. So if the Americans don't do that to Exxon... then BP will disappear.
Exactly.
It will lose. But God knows what percent of the population understand this stuff. Very, very small percentage.
And unfortunately, the people that have a very strong message are the people like Gary Stevenson. They reach the masses. They get on the primetime TV shows, and then they essentially uneducate people even further.
Exactly, because the right answer to so many things in life is counterintuitive.
Yeah,
and requires real nuance and complexity to really get to grips with and understand.
Yeah.
And in a world of 1-minute TikTok videos and people like Gary Stevenson, we're choosing the wrong... I mean, demonstrably, go back to Britain is half as wealthy as a whole bunch of other developed world countries now. And 30 years ago, we were the same. That's very simple. We are doing things wrong. We are getting it wrong, right? And actually, the answer is not more government and more tax. The answer is that is what's caused the problem. The answer is be more like Switzerland and Singapore.
We've all seen the trajectory.
Yeah.
Everyone looks back at the past with rose-tinted glasses. Well, there has been a change. Yeah. We are obviously doing it wrong. Let's not do what we did for the last 20 years.
Let's be really
radical
about analysing where they're doing the best job.
Yeah, exactly.
Look
at some of our neighbours, literally our neighbours. But yeah. Anyway, that was a fantastic discussion.
We went all over the show, didn't we?
I know, but I love that. I really do love that because it's the way my brain works as well. So, I'm doing this for listeners, but I'm also doing this for me.
Yeah.
So,
well, I'm not sure my brain was working particularly well today. Hopefully it will all come out.
It's fantastic. So thank you so much again. So,
I look forward to the next one. Thanks for having me on.
Cheers.